I'm used to coming down that hill, but not on these two wheels. Something that has a whole lot more speed and delivers a whole lot more excitement.
The pinnacle of motorcycle road racing is the 500cc World Championship. It's contested over a series of 12 races throughout the world, and the races draw crowds averaging over 100,000 each. It rivals Formula One motor racing in popularity and international television coverage. When most people see motorcycle racing, either at the track or on television, they know that the guy who comes in first wins the race. But there are a lot of other things even enthusiasts don't know about the bikes and how they're ridden. Have you ever wondered why the riders don't stay right in the saddle all the time? Or why the tires don't have any tread? Did you know riders can make up to 1,000 gear shifts in one race? And although you've seen the bikes racing across your TV screen, have you ever wondered how fast they really are? Sure, you know they're quick, but believe me, they're so quick, the average person couldn't even imagine it. To show you how quick a racing motorcycle is, we're going to compare Freddie Spencer's 1984 Racing 500 bike around one lap of California's Laguna Seca Raceway with a street bike and a street car. The car is a Nissan 300ZX Turbo with 200 horsepower. It accelerates to 60 miles per hour in 7 seconds. The street bike is a 700 Honda Sabre, and it hits 60 in 4 seconds. To make it more interesting, we're giving the street car and street bike a start. The driver of the car is Jacques Couture, chief instructor of a racing school at this track, so he knows every inch of it. The street bike is being ridden by Sam McDonald, a former United States 250cc champion who's won many races here, and he's giving the car a 15-second start. Time for Freddie to put on his gloves. It's coming up to 30 seconds since the car left. Freddie has to catch the car and the bike before they cross the finish line, and the track is less than 2 miles long. The street bike is now catching the car very quickly. They're both about 2/3 of the way round the track, but the terrific grip and handling of the car means that it will hold off the bike until after the double corkscrew turn. The street bike finally powers past the car, 3 turns from the finish, but now Freddie is going through the corkscrew. Down this hill, the car will reach 90 miles an hour. That won't stop Freddie's bike racing past it. And now there's only 1 turn left. Early motorcycle racing was very different from today's sport. In the 1920s, the races were run on public roads. Each lap was often as long as 20 miles, and some races lasted up to 5 hours.
The bikes nowadays handle better, but in turn they go faster, so that kind of evens it out. They had to deal with tires that were not near as good. So that's why the riding styles have changed. You notice in the older days, most of the riders stayed in the center of the machine because they really couldn't afford to move around very much. And they didn't lean over near as far. as we do nowadays. And I think, you know, the racing has just changed.
By the early 1930s, the races had been shortened, and throughout this era, British bikes and riders won everything. But as the Second World War was approaching, the German bikes improved. And the very first European Championship in 1938 was won by a BMW. During the Second World War, the great Continental factories were all but destroyed. After the war, it was the turn of the British bikes again. Not until 1950 did the Italians have a win. Their World Championship Gilera was pushing out about 55 horsepower, as much as a modern minicar. That was the end of British dominance. Italian bikes, either Gileras or MV Agustas, often with British riders like Jeff Duke or Mike Hailwood, won every 500cc World Championship for the next 25 years. But by the early 60s, a new force had appeared on the scene. Japanese bikes were winning all the smaller capacity World Championships. And over the next 10 years, the Japanese bikes were to win 36 smaller capacity World Championships. But the big prize, the Grand Prix, the 500cc World Championship, had to wait until the mid-70s, when the brilliant Italian rider Giacomo Agostini won it on his Yamaha. Since then, Japanese bikes have won the championships every year, Suzuki virtually alternating with Yamaha, until Honda's sensational win with the young American Freddie Spencer in 1983. Incredible technical developments have taken place over the last 60 years. Now, the great power of modern racing motorcycles means that their frames have to stand tremendous forces in cornering and braking as the entire weight of the bike and rider are thrown onto the front section of the machine. But since the start of motorcycle racing, the basic layout of the principal components has hardly been altered. One of the greatest advances was the development of telescopic front forks, first seen in the late 30s. Inside these forks were a spring and also a damper to control the spring's bounce, a system we still have today. The next big advance was the so-called featherbed Norton of 1950, in which the rear wheel was suspended on forks linked near the bottom of the frame behind the engine, with vertical springs and dampers coming off the hub. This arrangement was so successful, it persisted well into the 60s. And today, many road bikes still have this layout. So let's look under the skin of a modern racing motorcycle. It was not until the 70s that the layout of the current bikes was set, when cantilever rear suspensions began to appear. With this system, the rear wheel's swing arm can be triangulated for strength, and a single spring and damper to control its bounce is fitted in the middle of the bike under the tank. Square tubes have also become fashionable. With special new alloys, they allow greater wall thickness and therefore strength, along with lower weight. By the early 1980s, racing motorcycle engine design had largely stabilized. What you needed to win was a water-cooled four-cylinder, the maximum number allowed under the international rules, two-stroke, like this Yamaha. That is, until the debut of the Honda NS 500. This had a three-cylinder engine, and it helped Freddie Spencer in 1983 to become the youngest ever world champion at the age of 21. The three-cylinder, here ridden by Randy Mamola, was smaller and lighter than the four, and so more maneuverable. But it wasn't more powerful. So for the 1984 season, Honda fell into line with other racing manufacturers and produced a new four-cylinder bike, which won the 1984 Manufacturers' Championship. The engine produced around 130 horsepower, as much as a medium-sized car with an engine 4 or 5 times the size. Why does the 500cc racing motorcycle engine produce so much power? First, because it's a two-stroke. Most big engine motorcycles and all cars are four-strokes. This is a section through one cylinder of a typical four-stroke, simplified and slowed right down so you can see what's happening. The four strokes, movements up or down of the piston, are induction, when the gasoline air mixture is drawn in, compression, as the piston moves up, compressing the fuel air mix, power, the spark plug ignites the mixture, which explodes, forcing the piston down again. Lastly, exhaust, as the piston goes up again and pushes the spent gases out. Therefore, one stroke in four produces power. By contrast, a two-stroke, seen here in simplified form, produces power every time the piston comes up. As the piston moves up, it uncovers the inlet port, and the natural vacuum draws the mixture in. The rising piston compresses the mixture, ready for ignition. The explosion drives the piston down, giving power and forcing the new mixture round towards the transfer port. The burnt gases can now escape through the open exhaust port. The piston will rise again to compress the mixture and begin the cycle once more. Power in every other stroke. Unlike cars or four-stroke engines, two-strokes need oil mixed in with the gasoline for lubrication. In a road engine, about 30% of the mixture is oil. In a racing engine, only about 5% is oil. And under racing conditions, a typical 500cc bike will do about 20 miles per gallon. Racing two-strokes are water-cooled. It's the only way to keep an even temperature in the engine, where the exhaust gas may reach 1,300 degrees. The exhaust system is a critical part of the two-stroke engine design. On the three-cylinder Honda, the pipes were in the usual position, swept up below the fuel tank. On the later four-cylinder, to improve the weight distribution, the fuel tank was put under and around the engine. You can imagine the insulation problems. This is the only time this tank position has been successful for many years, but it meant rerouting the exhaust pipes up where the fuel tank usually is, over the engine, and under the seat at the back. The design and construction of the exhaust pipes is an art in itself, because their exact length and shape controls the speed at which the burnt gas leaves the engine. Slow it down, and you lose power. With your engine turning out all that power, and the frame letting you get it onto the road, it's all useless if the tires can't handle it. And racing bikes spend most of their time with the power full on. But the developments in wheels and tires have been as great as in any other area. The older bikes naturally had spoked wheels, like the bicycles they were derived from. They had narrow rims and generally were about 20 inches in diameter. And the tires had a full tread pattern. To handle the power of modern racing engines and brakes, wheels and tires got wider and wider. We've probably now reached the limit to tire width, because anything heavier would make the bikes hard to steer and control. In many cases, the wheels are alloy castings, but on Honda's NS500 World Championship bike, they were made of carbon fiber. To keep the bike low and reduce weight, the wheels have become smaller, the front ones now down to 16 inches. The tires have no tread for dry weather racing. You only need a pattern tread in the wet to stop the wheel aquaplaning, floating on the layer of water between the tire and the road. Dry weather tires, having no tread, they have more rubber in contact with the road and can transmit more power. And these tires need to be strong. Ordinary road tires, subjected to this power and centrifugal force, would simply throw off their treads. Another difference about race tires, they don't work properly until they're warm. So the temperatures have to be checked very carefully to make sure the rubber is at the right temperature when it's at its most sticky, before the rider can really hang it out. And race tires have a short life. Just a little bit longer than the race is all they're designed for. Many of the earliest racing machines had brake blocks similar to that of a bicycle on both front and rear. Later, racing bikes used to have drum brakes, just like cars. By the 1930s, drum brakes were standard. The drums got bigger over the years and sprouted ducts and fins to carry air to them, in an attempt to get rid of the heat, which makes brakes inefficient. It wasn't until the 1970s that racing motorcycles turned to disc brakes. The great advantage of the disc is that it's out in the air and stays much cooler. Even the discs are bigger than they used to be, and at the front, there's one on each side of the wheel. Many different materials have been tried for the discs. Alloy for lightness, cast iron for rigidity, steel for strength. On Honda's championship bike, even carbon fiber for the rear brake. Rear brakes aren't so important, as you can see from their smaller size. The biggest visible difference between today's racing bikes and those of previous times is that the old ones ignored aerodynamics. Right up till the 50s, a racing motorcycle was about as aerodynamic as a house brick. In the late 50s, fairings began to appear. The early ones covered the front wheels, but this created so much side area that the bikes were very dangerous in a crosswind. The rules were changed, so that the front wheel had to be out in the open. Today, the racing rules still don't allow the front wheel to be covered, or the back half of the rear wheel, but designers still make every effort to reduce drag. And this is important, not just to make your bike as fast as it can be, but also so that you can leave the smallest hole in the air behind you. One of the ways you can get past the other guy is by getting a kind of toe. The front bike punches a hole in the air. This means the air resistance behind it is lower. If the guy behind is in the right place, he can get into this hole and get sucked along actually faster than his bike's maximum speed. Brake just that little bit later than the rider in front of you. Even 3 or 4 feet will do it, and you're past. Outbraking the other guy, even when you haven't been slipstreaming him, is one of the key ways you get past. It's a matter of nerve and skill, who can leave it latest. Because the last one to brake will be into and out of the corner first. This late braking calls for very fine judgment of speed and distance.
Because of the speeds, the depth perception is very important. You'll see a lot of people, they can go fast, but they can't go that little extra, that extra second or 2 seconds. And I think that's what is that difference, is the quickness, reflexes, and depth perception, being able to go into the turn at the last possible moment and get on the brakes and be able to hit the exact line that you have to, exact point in the turn to get your maximum exit speed and not give up in any area.
The line you take around the corners is critical. You try to straighten them out as much as possible. Here, Freddie starts wide, then moves tight into the apex to get the bike straight and the power full on as soon as possible, using the whole width of the road to do it. But if you do that at a tight turn, you leave a lot of space for the other guy to get inside you, and the inside man has the advantage because he has a shorter distance to go around the corner. This is why Randy Momola here takes a tight approach, leaving no room for Kenny Roberts to get inside him. From the earliest days, racing motorcyclists remained more or less rigid on the bike, staying firmly in the saddle on corners. They did this right up to the early 70s. But then, as the tires grew wider and able to transmit more power, it became important to keep the bike as upright as possible when leaving corners. So riders developed the technique of hanging over the side and letting one knee go right down to the track. This style of riding is used by every top rider today. As you approach the corner, you're tucked down for the least air resistance and maximum speed. Coming up to the corner, the first thing you have to do is brake. And as you straighten up in the saddle, the rider's body itself becomes an air brake. Now your right hand is on the brake, but you're already sliding across the saddle, your knee out, ready to hang down in the actual turn. And of course, as you approach the corner, you're shifting down through the gears too, so that you'll be in exactly the right gear to leave the corner. Now you're into the turn, and maybe your knee is scraping on the ground. But then as you go through the turn, you want to get the power on as soon as possible. And this probably means shifting gears as you're leaving the turn and straightening up and getting back onto the center of the bike again. If this turn is immediately followed by another, in the other direction, you have to start it all over again, now climbing off the bike on the other side. In a race, you're doing all this, braking with your right hand and right foot, operating the clutch with your left hand, changing gear with your left foot, as you're leaning over, climbing out of the saddle, straightening up, steering the bike, and all the time the other guys are trying to get past you. it demands tremendous concentration.
That is the thing that I believe I've worked on more than anything else, is my ability to concentrate the entire length of the race, because that really determines my ability to run a pace. And I like to not vary over a second from start to finish. A lot of times you'll see a rider, or for that matter, any type motorsports person, they'll get out in the lead, but they can't really maintain that rhythm, that pace, unless they're being pressured.
If all this sounds dangerous, then you're right, it is dangerous. Getting that close to the road at speeds of up to 150 miles an hour means that the clothing the rider wears is of crucial importance. The only kind of support the riders wear is a back support, which shows the kind of strain that's put on them as they heave some 300 pounds of rubber, metal and fuel around. Although the riders' suits have great decorative value, they're totally functional. The style and fit of the suit combine so that the rider is totally free to move, but he is as aerodynamic as possible. Because on a racing motorcycle, the rider himself is a part of the aerodynamics. Many materials have been tried for these suits. In an age of plastics, you'd think a synthetic material would be best. But so far, nothing has beaten leather. Because the suit not only has to protect the rider if he's unlucky enough to come off the bike, but it also has to breathe. You can imagine how you'd feel zipped up in an airtight suit for an hour's hard work when the temperature inside it can reach 130 degrees. Since these racing bikes produce a sound level of 105 decibels when running at speed, all riders wear earplugs. And no racing motorcyclist would ride without gloves or without protection on his knees. The helmet is also crucial to the rider's safety, and again, his aerodynamics. The latest helmets are of synthetic materials, an energy-absorbing styrofoam liner surrounded by a tough fiberglass and epoxy laminate shell.
This will be the first Formula One practice of the afternoon. Last call, Formula One practice. Need to be mosey on up to the...
Qualifying or practice sessions are usually misunderstood. Meticulous records must be kept, because practice is not like a javelin thrower practicing his throw. It's more like trying different javelins. Most of the riders know the tracks like the back of their hand, so what they're doing is concentrating on 4 areas. Getting the right tires for the particular track and working them up to the correct temperature. Making sure the carburetor is set right, with the right fuel-air mix for this track and its atmospheric conditions. Getting the right gearing. This is the relationship between the engine speed and the road speed of the bike. The bikes have 6-speed transmissions and 4 variations for each gear. That's 144 possibilities without even touching the overall gearing.
We'd like to remind you also that...
Last but not least, we've got to get the bike to handle right. This is not like a street bike where the factory gives you a good average setting for the springs and dampers. These bikes are fine-tuned for every individual track and rider. What was right for last week's track may be too hard or too soft for this week. And a big part of the rider's skill is in knowing what changes will make his bike handle better. Having set the bike up to his satisfaction, the rider's main concern is now his own performance.
For myself, I enjoy being in front. In my younger years, for example, 10 through 12, 13 years old, there were times when I'd be leading a race, a dirt track race, and just slide down or something where you just lose concentration because you're not being pressured. And it's easy to do that. We call it relaxing. And of course, you can't afford to do that in road racing because of the speeds and different things. And that's something I've really worked on is to get in front and keep the rhythm and pace going.
Rhythm, pace, and superb control are qualities shared in varying degrees by all the front runners in motorcycle racing. Okay, so now you know just why the bikes are as quick as they are. Let's remind you how they compare with other high-speed transportation.